to say too much, but these are two of my dearest friends and favorite artists, Rian Johnson and Nathan Johnson. Ladies and gentlemen. They sent me a bunch of questions that they wanted me to ask. And tonight, Nathan and Ryan invited me to none other than Musso and Frank's before we came here. Last time I was at Musso and Frank's was also with Ryan. And I said, they sent me a bunch of questions. And Ryan goes, ah. And I said, is it all right if we just talk about religion? And they were like, yeah. Okay, so
strap in. Yeah, a few small martinis.
A line that stood out to me, I might get it wrong because I didn't double check, but it just stuck with me, was I worship at the altar of rationality. Is that what he says?
Yeah, I worship at the altar of the rational.
Of the rational. Is that you? Would you say that's your point of view? Or if not, what's your point of view? What altar do you worship at?
Well, I worship at the altar of Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
I know
that. No, I mean, you know, a big part of wanting to make this movie about this thing, about faith, was as you know, I grew up very, very Christian. I was not Catholic, I was Protestant, evangelical, but it's not just that I was in a churchy household, I was deeply, deeply Christian. I used two deeplies there. And my faith and my relationship with Christ was how I framed the world around me through my childhood, teenage years, up into my early 20s, and I'm not a believer anymore. So the truth is, what was really exciting about this for me was I have, like that scene where it's Blanc and Judd, I have both of those people inside me. Like I think a lot of people who maybe grow up with faith and are not in the church anymore do. And so, and I think that's also why I felt okay in approaching this subject, was I wasn't coming at it from, an outsider or somebody who was just trying to ding the church. But I'm also not inside the church anymore. I have both perspectives, and letting those two kind of actually have a conversation was kind of the starting point for all of this.
When you say you're not a believer, there are a lot of moments in the movie that I found quite moving as someone that didn't grow up with much religion. I was raised kind of culturally Jewish, but neither of my parents, I would say, are particularly spiritual in that way. And I found a lot of the moments in here when Judd is speaking about the merits of his faith quite moving. But it's interesting you say, I'm no longer a believer. What is the difference between a believer and someone who can write like that, who can make these sincere and compelling appeals to the merits of faith?
Well, I mean, when I started writing it, I actually, and this is by far the hardest script I've ever written. This was a bitch. This one. It was, when I started writing it, Judd was all wrong. He was coming out. It just wasn't clicking. It wasn't working. And I realized it's because I was writing it from my perspective right now, as someone who is not a believer anymore, and it was many years removed. And so it was very interesting. I had to. It almost is sort of like acting. I would think I realized I had to put myself back. I had to genuinely dig back in and find kind of when I was a Christian and the things that inspired me and that to this day I still believe are genuinely good things. I had to get back into that. I couldn't just observe it from the outside in order to write that character. But I also, it is though necessarily filtered through who I am now. So that means those things that are going to come out are the things I still believe in today, which the Christian notion of love your enemy. I mean, that's the most profound, difficult challenge, and it is also what the world in the year of our Lord 2025 needs the most right. I know it's the thing that I find the hardest thing in the world, sitting there scrolling through my angry little, social media feed. I mean, the notion of loving my enemy, that's profound, and that's deeply radical, and that's what Christ calls Christians to do. So yeah, it's a strange, I don't know, it's a strange combination of those things.
So you both, I know, grew up in two different houses, but for those who don't know, share a grandfather.
You wouldn't think from our height,
Right.
our relative heights, that we're related.
But you guys have this in common, that religion was a part of your upbringing. How about you? Like, where are you at with your, if we're using the term believer, I'm still looking for a sharper, what is a believer and what isn't a believer?
Is you believe in God, I guess, is that's the, and
Okay.
I don't believe in...
But what does it mean to believe in God?
You're bypassing me. I see how...
Well, I'll use 3 deeplies, where Ryan used 2 for my childhood. I feel like our family was even a little bit more extreme. Ryan was, in many ways, my touchstone to culture outside of Christian culture.
I remember lobbying your father to let you watch Time Bandits.
It's a good older cousin, right?
He didn't go for it. He was like, nope. Yeah.
And I thought the big bald guy in Time Bandits was God. That was what I thought God was. Sorry.
Wait, what was the question again?
What is it? I'm trying to understand. What does it mean to believe in God versus not believe if you still have these beautiful feelings towards it? How is that different than believing?
So I think, let me hit this from a slightly different angle.
Yep.
So we grew up with people who espoused Christianity, and they taught us morality. And in the last 10 years, the last 15 years, it's been incredibly sort of mind-breaking to see the people who taught us morality trade that for power. And I think my perspective is I realized that at a certain point there's this perspective of the church that defined my entire perception of the world and our culture, and I realized that in many ways was like a corporation, in terms of sustaining itself, and in terms of, if you're a part of this, you need to say the things that we tell you, and that's really kind of a thing that is very at odds when you're trying to make art or trying to, those things that representing a corporation and trying to express things are very much at odds, and so I think my path has been both a step away from believing those things that I believe, but also, like, I don't know, it's really hard to talk about because, like Ryan said, this movie also, this is the first movie that Ryan's made that made me cry at the end of it. And I feel like I kind of watched this movie and I'm like, holy shit, is this heretic gonna make me find my faith again? Because I think it is a profoundly generous movie, and I love that you can identify that generosity in both Blanc and Judd, and that feels, while undefinable, also wonderful.
You talked about trading morality for power. That obviously rings a bell with this movie. What's the Josh Brolin character's name again?
Wicks.
Wicks, okay. Is this, I can't help but watch this movie and see an allegory. I'm not gonna ask you to get political, but like it feels allegorical.
No idea what you're talking about.
For what you're you're saying of that difference between faith and power. So is that then the difference? I keep coming back to this. When you say no longer a believer, is when you say believer, are you talking about like allegiance to a center of power?
Well, when I say believe, also, everyone just do this if this is the most boring shit in the world. Sorry, talking about
this is what I'm interested in.
And I find this fascinating. I want to check in with you guys and make sure that.
Thank you for being
This is the only Q&A that exists like this on this whole thing because Joe is leading
I'm
it.
looking over at Shannon from the Netflix team and making
Like-
sure she's not.
You asked the wrong guy to moderate this one.
No, so, I mean, again, getting back to, so I actually, I want to take a second and define, so, because I feel you're struggling with this. And I get it, though, I understand, it's a good question. I guess, so, when I kind of became no longer a Christian in my 20s, and when I fell away from the church, and when I lost my faith, it wasn't, I don't know, it is kind of hard to define, but it's not as if you're kind of like, first of all, I didn't see it in terms of shedding an illusion in order to then live in the real world. Faith was an all-encompassing lens through which I parsed the world. It was my narrative frame of reference for how the world worked. And when I no longer believed in the existence of God or in Christ as a spiritual entity that I was actually having a relationship with, what I had to do was find a new lens to see the world through. It's not like you're shedding a lens and then stepping out into the sunlight. You have to find another narrative framing device for the world. And that framing device brought much, how could it not? It brought a lot of the same foundation of the basic things that I valued from my time as a Christian. Many of which are just the red type parts of the New Testament, and there's a lot of that carries over, I think, even as a humanist into
The red type parts, is that the quote?
that's Jesus, the Jesus quotes.
That he said, the things he said.
Yeah, sorry. And so I think even as a humanist who's just trying to live a good life, there are things lots of that profoundly resonates into how I aspire, at least, to, in a flawed way, to try and live my life today. So I guess that's kind of how I think probably I can connect to people who do have faith and say, and that's largely what Father Judd was for me, was trying to find those things that I still have a connection with today, and put them into a character who does still have faith.
I think that's part of why it so resonated with me as someone who doesn't have organized religion in my backstory of life. I do find a desire for something sacred or even holy that maybe is missing, maybe in some secular.
Well, let me tell you about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Give us a moment.
It brings me a little bit to, there's part of what this movie does also is, I think, really sharply portrays secular culture, especially in terms of, like, I love the way that you portray what media is today. That there's this YouTuber character, and that ties very much to politics and power and this cult of personality. And in a certain way, one could argue that this media culture we live in is, in a way, a dominant religion of our times. Maybe I'll just stop there. Does that ring true at all to either of you?
Yes, but also, though, I feel like there's a temptation to kind of identify directly with, I'll say the T word, directly with the Trump era and directly with what, and the reality is, and I don't know if you feel this, we were kids in the 80s in evangelical households, and during the Reagan years of the 80s, that's kind of, and it preceded this actually, but that's when we were experiencing then this kind of crucible fusion of Christianity into this, with this warped political perspective, and that's when that was really first kind of forming, and it has curdled and it has, is definitely, absolutely curdled into something much worse than that, but it's a straight line from that to where we're at now. So I feel like it's not something that is very recent. It's something that I felt very much when I was, when I was a kid in the church.
Yeah, and when I talk about the media of today, I don't intend it to mean just the right wing or the left wing, or I mean, there's a worship of follower count and views and stuff, or an obsession with it anyway, that does have a lot of like normative, this is how you ought to be, this is what we ought to care about, I guess I'm curious to hear about where that's coming from for you and what connections you make between this movie that's on the one hand very much about, an ancient religion, and on the other hand about the dominant sort of lens through which our society views itself today.
Yeah, and for me, it's another form of, I don't know, it's similar to with Wicks's perspective in this of us against them, and build the fortress walls, and the notion of persecution, they're out to get us, and how that can be used as a tool to harness, to harness his flock. I would classify the media that you're describing, and that drive for attention, that drive for popularity is exactly the same thing. And it's similar to money, it's similar to power, it's kind of all those things kind of encapsulated in this one, slice. It's all the stuff that's antithetical to Christianity that is driving a lot of the loudest voices right now in the discourse.
Well, and I think like if you feel like someone is out to get you, that unlocks an extreme, blank check to essentially do anything. I think like when you're talking about media, the scene that pops in my mind, it has nothing to do with media, but when Judd talks to Luis on the phone, and in that moment he's gotten caught up in someone else's game, and then this bell sort of rings true to his purpose. And I feel like that's all of us with social media, with media, with everything. It's so easy to get caught up in what's important to everyone else, what feels like matters, and then you have an interaction like that, and you remember, in Judd's case, he remembered, oh, actually, my job is not to solve Blanc's thing here. My job is to serve these people, and
The siege thing is really.
Yeah.
There was, real quick, I'll tell that I went to. I was a youth group kid. I went to Young Life camp several times. I went to several Christian camps, and which there were a lot of great experiences at. But I remember being at one, and the culmination of the week was something called Night Chase. I think it was called like Night Chase. And basically,
What's a culmination?
meaning at the end of the week, the big events, the big like, ooh, we're going to do Night Chase at the end of the week. And Night Chase was this. All the campers started on one end of the campus, and the setup of the camp, and the setup was what we all knew was going to happen has happened, and the government is hunting down Christians. Oh yeah, welcome to camp. And the whole thing was to get from, and all the counselors had flashlights, and the thing was to get from one end of the dark camp, they turned out the lights, all the way to the other without getting caught by the counselors.
You're how old in this picture?
I would have been probably in junior high.
33?
Yes. Yeah, probably in junior high, I think. So what Nathan said just triggered that memory in me, and that's exactly that's the part of the cloud of things that were distilled into Wicks, and that's a perfect example of what he's saying, that the notion of starting kids out with that perspective as a Christian, and just the notion of what you can then use that to, the us against them notion, of how you can warp that into something that is antithetical to Christ, and I don't know, that's something that I think back.
It does seem, you say it's antithetical to Christ. That was my next question, was like, what do you think, what would Jesus say about our our time right now.
I mean, can I just say my favorite little moment that I like clocked after, obviously in doing the music, I've watched the movie a million times and I'm always like seeing little things, and my favorite little moment is when Andrew Scott's character is sitting in the rectory, and he's trying to like square the circle of realizing that his leader is fallen, but actually maybe we need an asshole to lead us, and he comes to this moment of realization. He's like, we need something.
The church doesn't need some pussy.
Yeah, we need someone to fight with us. We don't need a pussy. And over his shoulder is
Who's
Jesus.
gonna lie down and take it?
Yeah, we don't need a pussy who's gonna lie down and take it. We need someone to fight for us. And over his shoulder is a painting of Jesus on the cross. and I just was texting Ryan, this is so good.
My mind also goes to just the other day, an article came out about you, and I wasn't expecting it, but the headline was something along the lines of Rian Johnson rails against AI and talks about because there is some contingent of AI enthusiasts that I think do have a religious fervor about it, that talk about it in terms of this thing is going to be like a god. That's not everybody, but there is a significant chunk of the people that are building this technology. What do you think of that?
Aren't you guys glad you're here today?
Yeah. I think they are desperately waving on the side. But I'm going to do a quick 20 minutes on AI. I'm going to get Guillermo on speakerphone. We're going to get into this. I would, first of all, be much, and by the way, anyone look up on I mostly see them on Instagram, but Joe is one of the most articulate people that I know about this topic, and has been speaking to politicians and speaking to business leaders, and has been really, really putting your neck out there in a way that is absolutely, in a way that's articulate and is not just raging, but is incredibly intelligent. So, and I feel utterly unqualified to speak beyond that. I mean, my thing is just, I feel like it's funny. I just, I've been reading there's this author, William Gaddis, and he wrote, I've been reading some of the books he wrote in the 70s, obviously pre-AI, but he was obsessed with the notion of player pianos, the roll kind of pianos that and he wrote about these in the context of, this is a step in the conduit of corporations being able to do exactly what they want to do, which is to take the messy artist out of the equation. He talks about a German, I'm not going to remember the name, a German biologist, anatomist from the 17th century, who, and this is true, he would dissect cadavers. He would take out their windpipes and kind of their throat boxes, and then he would create these bellows to push air through them to create the sound of singing, with his theory being that they could do this with famous opera stars who have died, and opera companies would be able to use that and would not have to hire Ultimately, all of this grotesque shit is what I see at the heart of AI. I see it as a kill the piano player. I understand why corporations are excited about this. I understand why they want to take these messy artists out of the equation. But also, fuck that shit. That's gross.
I think I have one more. To me, something where I find maybe a sanctity or a connection with something greater than myself, and I think I've had this in common with both of you, is in the creative process, art and creativity. do you see something in common between religion or spirituality or faith and being an artist or being a filmmaker, being a musician? Do those dots ever connect for you guys?
Yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, I feel like that I don't know. Yes, but for example, like, I've had a few people during the course of talking about this movie ask me, well, did filmmaking replace faith for you? And I wouldn't put it like that, because I think that the reality is faith is an all-encompassing, like I said, lens through which you parse the world's entire system of belief. Filmmaking is, I think filmmaking is to a bigger worldview. Is like prayer. Filmmaking is a method and a process by which you excavate things inside of you and offer them up and connect with bigger things, and connect with bigger things in terms of an audience, and that connects us all sitting watching it. That's what art is. But it's not the thing itself. And so I think that's the distinction. I think if you just live inside filmmaking, live inside movies, then the reality is that all has to draw from a well. And so, and that well being, being life. Jesus, that sounded grand. I apologize. I'm sorry.
I think something I hold dear from my upbringing and my study is the idea of this narrative of God as a creator. And I have a whole lot of pictures of God as other things that I grew up with, but to answer your question specifically, personally, that feels like if that is true, if there is God as a creator, I feel that represented in all of us, in ourselves. To touch briefly on this concept of AI, the thing that I love so much about movie making is getting to collaboratively create with other people. And I think that spark, the idea that spark was maybe put inside of us and that maybe we pass that down to our children, that feels really, really wonderful, and just a lovely invitation for us to get to experience with the people that we get to collaborate with.
Can I say this was either the best or the worst Q&A? Thank you, Noah, so much. Thank you, guys.